Ja. Ja, ja zij is met meer vlakken op het feest bezig, dus heel actief en zo. Dus, ja. Dan, over meer inzet van onze studenten als maar dat kun je ook bijna niet weten. Dat is echt als je net zegt. Het is een vak. Succes. Dankjewel.
So I feel like the Dolphin is actually much bigger than Trust because we have like the Y-Drive is separated from the Google Drive, whereas the SharePoint, it's all seamlessly, everything is Microsoft. So I think for us, maybe that's good for us because we are not so down far down the road. We can still imagine a Y-Drive that's separated. We are already in the future. Our Y-Drive is not. We just stayed in the past. So long. Time is right? So we stayed in the past for so long that it ended up being the future. If we just stay the same, sometimes it will be the past, and sometimes it will become the present. It's just circular. Send it by email.
The main rule for art, Niels, Karel's work. There's a gate in the Snower Hotel, and next to it is a very small fisherman's cottage. It's still there when we live there. I don't understand.
Alright, there's also fish. Some fish in the water somewhere. You look for them.
No, not my children, my daughters. She lived stayed for very long in the house that she was Facebook. There's a family that was getting on, so if you want to see the main park, so it's not a big hotel. It's not a good location. As long as it's they only use the element that it's a very big house.
You didn't know how to do it. University of Aruba might need to drop it there.
I know that
Good evening. And welcome. My name is Valeria Cernei. I have the pleasure of being your host tonight for this debate and discussion on the topic of open science. And this event is organized also by Studium Generale in the context of the National Open Science Festival that is starting on the 24th of October. So if this is something that you would like to explore further after tonight's event, please join us for the National Open Science Festival and check out the program. And today we're kicking off this discussion with talking about what the implications of open science are for the role of the university in our societies. And I would like to point out that we shared a handout with some key terms for tonight's debate that you found on your seat. And there we define open science as reflecting the idea that scientific knowledge of all kinds should be, when appropriate, openly accessible, transparent, rigorous, reproducible, replicable, accumulative, and inclusive. And we are going to unpack this definition as the event unfolds. So open science is transforming how we conduct science, how we share knowledge, and it's affecting how knowledge and science and research is done, both at the university but also beyond universities. And as open science practices become more widely spread, we are wondering how that might affect the university and whether at some point they might make the university obsolete. So this is the proposal that we're going to be debating during this event. Does open science make the university obsolete? And we have, we'll start with a formal debate addressing this proposal. So the debate will unfold according to the Karl Popper format, which is structured. We have two teams, one team arguing for this proposal, another team arguing against this proposal. And the aim of this formal part of the event is not to determine a winning team, but to kind of explore the topic in a very time-efficient, dynamic manner. And then we can move on to create a bit more nuance through a discussion with the audience. So after the formal debate, we'll be opening up the discussion for everybody who wants to participate with questions, comments, or reflections. So as a disclaimer also in this context, we'd like to emphasize that the statements that will be made during the formal debate are not necessarily reflective of the personal and professional positions of our speakers. This is a debating exercise, and then we'll move on to creating a bit more nuance and discussing this topic further. So we're honored to be joined by 6 speakers tonight. 5 of them are in the room, 1 of them is online. And on the team arguing that open science makes the university obsolete, we have Danila Otavin, who is joining us online. He's a master's student of clinical neuropsychology, philosophy, science, and humanities at the RUH. He also serves as an independent member of the University Council, a Unibody student ambassador, and is a member of the program committee at the Faculty of Philosophy. And we're really happy that you could join us online. It took a bit of troubleshooting, but eventually all of us are here, so thank you for that. On the team also is Vera Heiningham, assistant professor of resilience in youth at the University of Groningen, who integrates open science and open pedagogy in her work, and also serves on several open science boards in the Netherlands. Welcome, Vera. And finally, on the team arguing that open science makes the university obsolete is Mira Baust-Schuck, the Library Open Education Coordinator at the Delft University of Technology. Mira is passionate about motivating and supporting academics and learners in their open journey, and she's also actively involved in national and European community-led open education projects and communities and networks. So this is the team arguing that open science makes the university obsolete. The team arguing against this proposal is composed of Margaret Gold, who is the coordinator of the Citizen Science Lab at the Leiden University and the network coordinator of the National Network of Citizen Science Practitioners in the Netherlands. Welcome, Margaret. Also on the team arguing against the proposal is Caroline Cunningham, who is a pre-master student in marketing management and also works as student assistant at the Open Science Community Groningen. And finally, we are joined by Taichi Ochi, who is a project leader within the Open Science program. He also conducts research investigating the role of social determinants of health and biological markers to personalize healthcare. Welcome, everybody. We're really happy to have you here. And before starting the formal debate, I'd like to ask everybody to reserve their applause until the formal debate is over, so as not to interrupt the flow. And as a note to the speakers, again, I'll be keeping time, and I have 2 cards that I will be waving around. The yellow card means you have 1 minute left, and the blue card means that the time is up. So without further delay, let's start the debate. With the opening statement made by the team arguing that open science makes the university obsolete, and this statement will be made by Danila Otavin.
Digital presence here, and a very good greeting to everybody in the audience. The proposition before us tonight is that open science makes the university obsolete. This isn't about whether universities have been valuable historically. It is about whether they are still necessary now in the 21st century, when knowledge is no longer scarce, learning no longer depends on enrollment, and research no longer requires gatekeeping. We argue that the university, an institution designed for narrow information scarcity, has become functionally obsolete in an age of information abundance. Open science is not a simple tool nor website. It's a movement, a culture, and a new way of knowing that insists knowledge be open, including its data, methods, and results made transparent, accessible, and inclusive. The core principle is simple. Knowledge should function as a public good rather than a private commodity. For centuries, universities have claimed to be the guardians of that good, but open science now fulfills that role more effectively and more equitably. By the university, we mean the traditional institution that has historically rested on 3 monopolies. First, it has been the primary producer and gatekeeper of research. Second, it has been the principal vehicle for advanced education. Third, it has acted as the official arbiter of expertise through degree granting and professional credentials. These monopolies once defined its value, and so by obsolete, we do not mean destroyed or made irrelevant overnight. We mean no longer necessary for their original purpose. When a system performs the same essential functions more effectively, the old structure loses necessity. The horse did not vanish when the car appeared, but it ceased to be essential for transportation, and certainly for long-distance travel. So our case is straightforward. Open science is systematically dismantling university monopoly and building a new decentralized paradigm that performs the university's core functions more effectively, more equitably, and more efficiently. Every essential function that once required a university can now happen in open networks. When an institution's essential functions are replicated and improved upon by alternatives, that institution itself becomes obsolete. And even if we can continue to call institutions universities, the original form has been long replaced. The name now outlives the reality. And so then the ship of Theseus comes to mind. If every plank of a ship is replaced, is it still the same vessel? The modern universities are undergoing the same transformation. Its pieces replaced by open platforms, its identity unchanged only in name. Allow me to explain how this transformation unfolds across the 3 domains with some greater detail. So first, open science breaks the university's monopoly on access knowledge. For centuries, if you wanted to access advanced learning or current research, you had to enter a university. Today, that is no longer true. Knowledge is directly accessible to anyone with an internet connection. MIT's OpenCourseWare alone has served over 300 million learners worldwide, completely free of charge. Preprint services such as Archive and bioRxiv allow immediate access to cutting-edge work, while repositories and databases make vast archives available beyond paywall. Even a pirate website like SciHelp cannot get you an article faster than a university library. So the gates of knowledge have been opened, and the universities no longer own the gates. They simply hold the locks. Second, open science decentralizes research and collaboration, thus ending the monopoly over who gets to create knowledge and how that knowledge is validated in the first place. The traditional model concentrated authority within elite institutions, reproducing what philosophers have called epistemic injustice. Put simply, where geography, affiliation, and funding determine who can participate. So open science levels that field. A researcher in Bogota or Bangalore can access the same data sets as one in Harvard or Oxford. Citizen sciences can contribute meaningfully to discoveries, and transparent peer review can allow to catch errors much faster than a closed system could. Consider this. In psychology, a landmark replication project found that only 39% of studies replicated successfully. In contrast, in AI research, where data and code are shared openly, reproducibility jumps from 33 to 86. So transparency does not erode quality. It is the very mechanism that raises it. Even the weaknesses of the closed model prove our point. Retraction Watch, for example, reported more than 4,600 retractions in 2022 alone, nearly half of them due to fraud. When review happens behind closed doors, errors hide for longer. And when the data and code are open, errors are found and fixed faster. Third, open science is democratizing credentials. The university's monopoly on certifying expertise is eroding. Most employers and institutions look for a verifiable competence rather than symbolic degrees. For example, 70% of employers now consider open source contributions when hiring. Finland has already integrated micro-credentials and open badges into their national framework. Google, IBM, and even governments have dropped degree requirements for many roles. The credential is migrating from the campus to the cloud. So these three developments, open access to knowledge, decentralized collaboration, and alternative credentialing, are not distant predictions, they are key realities. And they all point to the same conclusion. The university's core functions no longer require the university. Even so, some may object, but universities are adapting, they're embracing open science, exactly, and that adaptation itself concedes our point. When an institution must replace its very function to remain relevant, it becomes the shape of feces. What remains is not the same university, it is a vessel sailing under an old name. And sometimes names reveal destiny, call it nominative determinism. Just as Usain Bolt was perhaps always destined to run fast, a university whose name derived from the idea of making knowledge universal seems destined to complete that promise through openness. This then is the heart of our case. Universities were built to guard knowledge in a time when knowledge was scarce. In an open world, guarding is no longer serviceable, but an obstruction. Excuse me, open science. Give it a second. So the question is not whether universities will exist next year or in the next decade. The question is whether their traditional form remains necessary. And we claim when essential functions of an institution, teaching, research, credentialing, are being done more openly, more quickly, and more fairly elsewhere, then that institution, however venerable, becomes functionally obsolete.
Thank you, Danila. Now we have 3 minutes for questions from Taichi Ochin.
My learned opponent, thank you very much for your points. I think actually you kind of built the case for open science, didn't you? In the sense that you mentioned MIT's having an open course of their sharing. Oxford is sharing their data to University of Bangalore. Aren't these academic institutions using current technological advances to disseminate what they're doing, education resources, research resources? And isn't that the way that we're now doing this through open science practices? So for me, the points that you bring out that it is, call it, open science doesn't require university institutions, you're actually reinforcing the statement that universities still hold a very important pillar of defining what is good education and good research to be able to disseminate to, for example, as you highlighted, the differentiation between global north and global south. And in relation to the point that you highlighted that more people can publish, you also highlighted there's a lot more retractions. And part of being able to retract some of those publications is due to having open transparency in what the data is being done. And a lot of those retractions aren't able to share their data, aren't able to share their information of how they've conducted the research, which is reason for pushing. Oh, sorry.
The question, please.
Oh, so the question is more of like, you've brought these points, can you clarify further? Because at the end, you seem to be strengthening the case for open science with your points.
I can try to, because I didn't understand like a single specific question. But with regard to universities adopting open science, how can they be obsolete if they adopt it? Even if they adapt, they're abandoning the old model to stay relevant. And that means the traditional university, as we know it, is itself obsolete. And without, if you say that without university oversight, won't open science be full of low quality, fraudulent research? Well, open science uses the very transparency and crowd review to uphold quality. In fact, having many eyes on research often catches errors faster than a closed peer review. And quality alone isn't lost, it's improved by openness. I think you had one more question. If you can remind me the last one.
Oh, well, I think you kind of went through the questions, but maybe just another point. So you also see different industries holding similar transparent metrics, but then you see the market style approach towards democratizing things actually ends up biting people in their hands, if you want to call it leveraging of social media platforms that is started out being free and now it's transparent and pushing different types of messaging, let's call it. So how do you see, if we do leave it to the market metrics for open science or open education resources, that you can stop people from pushing that way or narrative that way?
I'd say those platforms are astrosurfing, so taking up an old name and pretending, using its prestige and credibility to advance their own goals and agendas. And it's fundamentally, the examples that you mentioned with the social media, for instance, are not open science as we conceive it.
Thank you both. We're moving to the opening speech of the team arguing against the proposition that open science makes the university obsolete, which will be delivered by Margaret Gold.
Thank you very much to my fellow panelists and also to the audience for the opportunity to make the case that the university is in fact not obsolete. The role of the university as a system of knowledge production and dissemination will certainly change, however, as the movement towards open science continues to remove barriers of access and participation and reuse or reproduction, expand knowledge production to include societal actors and other forms of knowledge. We see a continuum of a process of change that's already been happening for quite some time, moving from the third mission of transferring academic knowledge to the outside world and evolving to a fourth generation of university who aim to make a deeper impact on society and together and collectively solve societal challenges and fostering cooperation with the public. But to make the case for the ongoing role of the university, instead of looking to this future that we're evolving towards, I'd actually like to go back to the original Latin term, universitas magistrorum and scholarium, as a community of teachers and scholars. And the original concept of academic freedom, which existed at the birth of the very first universities in Europe, the European concept of the university, was about the freedom to travel across borders and lands in pursuit of unbound learning and discovery. It was a freedom of movement as well as a freedom of discovery and a freedom of curiosity. So when looking to the future, we only need to look at these original organizational starting points to broaden our own understanding of who has knowledge to impart, who has the desire to learn it and produce it, and where such learning can take place. It's certainly the case that many scholars that are trained in the classical system of deep and narrow specialization and hierarchical ladder climbing, who have mastered the game of publications and accolades, may feel threatened by this change in the system and a loss of exclusivity, a loss of who has knowledge and is the expert to be turned to. But even for these people who feel nervous or concerned about a change to the academic system in which they've thrived and excelled, they will also benefit from fresh appreciation for their knowledge and expertise, thanks to other skills and channels for making that visible, impactful, applied in practice, or form the basis for new discoveries and ongoing learning. So my counter-argument to the proposition that open science will make universities obsolete is that open science takes us back to those first principles of why universities came into being in the first place, and a new system of how that is better suited to our times and to our future. So the first principle of why a university is an organizational one. It brings scholars together in a community of learning that leads ultimately to a certification of the level of knowledge reached. In modern times, we see that the internet and the World Wide Web has already brought human beings together in closer contact across the whole world and is enabling things like pedagogic innovations like the flipped classroom, taking university lectures worldwide and MOOCs, and even during the pandemic, putting the classroom into the bedroom of the student as we all learned from home and online. And new models for blended learning and fieldwork are showing us that organizing the delivery of quality learning not only takes place in the lecture hall on campus, but also outside in the field. The inclusion of citizen science and community-engaged learning in higher education represents a valuable way to increase student engagement with the world beyond the confines of the classroom. These new innovations are all made possible by the organizational abilities of the university. The second principle is one of support and economies of scale. By organizing all of the tools and enabling environments one needs to pursue knowledge through research and experimentation, and this can include specialized lab equipment, lab space, but also a wide range of colleagues possessing specific areas of knowledge, maximizing the usage of both by making them readily accessible and available. But much of the world we wish to explore and learn about is outside of university walls, with a really messy mix of contextual factors and complex interactions, and our tools for investigating these are increasingly in our own pockets. Research is thus mobile and not confined to the lab alone, and it can be undertaken in collaboration with citizen scientists or entirely by communities investigating their own environment. However, coordinating these various factors that support and enable research is still where the specialized skills and economies of scale, if you will, of a university can and always will play a role. The third principle is one of quality and rigor, ensuring that one can have confidence in both the research method and its outcomes. Much as technology development pathways have learned the importance of incremental development and frequent testing for catching bugs and errors before they are magnified beyond repair, the new tools for opening up science, for transparency, for early peer review, preprint, are making it possible to both improve rigor and catch opportunities for improvement and build on previous knowledge at earlier and earlier stages, resulting directly in the quality of the outcomes. And where research takes place in the community and bottom-up citizen science approaches, it is still the data quality rigor of well-established scientific method that ensures confidence in the outcomes, maintaining a crucial role for a researcher or data scientist in the whole research cycle. So the need for expertise and rigor does not disappear or become obsolete. Rather, it will be dispersed and become more widely shared, with new systems for building communities of learning and knowledge production in the style of the original scholarly guild, with self-regulating systems to ensure quality of work and confidence and trust in both method and outcomes, and new channels for sharing and disseminating this knowledge, all building on the underlying why the university exists in the first place. With that, I close that the underlying principles of why very much lead to better science, and the university will therefore remain a cornerstone of our systems of organization, support, scale, quality, and rigor.
Thank you, Margaret. We have 3 minutes for cross-examination by Mira.
Yes, thank you, Margaret. It seems like we're arguing towards more or less the same conclusion, to be honest, when I'm hearing the arguments of your team and the opening speech as well. The important part here is to also understand that the proposition statement refers to the university as it is. We're not rejecting that it is evolving, that it is transforming, and open science is one of, as you've also confirmed in your speech, is also one of the main vehicles and the main ways to spur this and accelerate this transformation. Yet, even if universities are adapting, they have to abandon the old models to stay relevant and to stay up to date and to continue this knowledge production system to benefit all, because this is also the role of science and the role of open science especially. So I would still, would you agree with me that the university as it is, as we know it right now, is obsolete? It has to reinvent itself completely at some point in order to come to that future, but also the past that you are drawing from.
We certainly share a recognition of the value and importance of open science and continuing these pathways of evolving what the university is. But I don't share the idea that it requires a complete tearing down and rebuilding of what the university is, but rather going back to first principles and the why principles to think about new ways of delivering on the how, which still has all of those at the heart of what is the university and what is the role of the university in society. So it is indeed a new role. But I would postulate that it would not be unrecognizable for the very first universities that took place in Europe, despite perhaps no longer being able to recreate such beauty as the room that we are currently in. They would recognize those scrappy first gatherings of scholars in the forms of guilds and academic freedom.
Thank you. And a quick follow-up question. The university, as you're describing it, it provides organization, it provides structure. What about the communities outside of the university, beyond the university, the academic walls, beyond the ivory tower, that also provide that structure and that provide this community feeling? Also provide some alternative forms of certification, as Daniela, our first speaker, has mentioned. Does it not defy this one of the core whys of the university as a rather elitist system, as a system that keeps many outside of its gates, of its walls?
I take your point about the necessity to tear down those barriers of access and stop clinging on to this sense of elitism. But I do disagree that the university then no longer has a particular role, particularly when it comes to scale and rigor and quality assurance. There's still very much a role for the university within the new systems of open science that take place outside of physical buildings and in communities and in community science.
Well, also within the open science, informal open science structures. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Mira. We're moving on to the next speech by the team arguing for the proposition that open science makes the university obsolete, given by Vera Heininger.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. So as my colleague Daniela just explained, open science makes the university obsolete, although you see that differently. We really argue for that. Because knowledge is, as Daniela explained, openly accessible. The collaboration is decentralized, as it is now. And alternative credentials are actually emerging. I will deepen this case by showing how open science is faster, cheaper, and also more equitable. So why I think universities can no longer sustain their monopoly, so to speak. First of all, universities are extremely slow and, well, very expensive. They rely on tuition fees, very costly journal subscriptions, to sustain the university as it is. And open science eliminates both of these things. And during COVID, the best example was COVID, because during COVID we saw that the speed of preprints actually saved all of our lives, right? That we shared these new findings via preprints within days, compared to the traditional way of waiting months for new findings. That should, well, let us know that universities can just not keep up the pace with open science. Another example to show, well, the expense, with regard to the expense, is the MOOC and the open science textbooks. I mean, they provide the top-level education that we need, but just for free. Why would you pay thousands of dollars for courses where you can also go to MIT, which was already mentioned, but also Delft has great lectures just for free? Sure, open science isn't costly either. I'm not saying that. I mean, the cost to read is near to zero, but of course we have to make the structures and build the communities to do so. But at least those are at a fraction of the cost of tuition fees and the subscriptions to these costly journals. And even with these boundaries, our core still stands. University models are slow, they're costly, and open science is just fast and way more affordable for our society than university structure. And I think that makes our point that the university is obsolete by that. The second point is that open science erodes universities' monopoly on those credentials that we were talking about earlier. Employers now value GitHub and contributions via open source way more than they do diplomas. There was this survey, okay, fair enough, it was by GitHub, and they surveyed mostly tech companies. But apart from that, in their survey, they showed that 70% of all tech companies said, I would hire someone based on their skills, on their open source, skills that they show on their CV, instead of a degree, for example. The best example, I think, is Finland. Did you know that Finland have actually integrated micro-credentials and open badges in their national hiring policies? How awesome is that? Well, sure, okay. Some jobs, as you also mentioned, by law are still required a degree. So a doctor, a lawyer, a pilot, they all need degrees. And that's, not really an issue that we're talking about here. That's mainly a policy issue and not really a need of knowledge. And that's what we're debating here. I think it's not a knowledge need, and for most other jobs, so apart from those that I just mentioned, a public portfolio proves that you can do the work, so it's more a proof of skill. The main point that we want to make is here that universities no longer own the certificate process. Reputation follows contribution and not institutional logos from universities. And the last point that we want to make is that open science tackles the inequalities and the power balances that universities actually perpetuate. Universities in wealthy countries, you already mentioned it, they dominate the system, while scholars in the global south just face exclusion. With open access preprints, open data sets, a researcher in Colombia or in Kenya, they can also they have the same access to that knowledge than researchers from Oxford or from Cambridge. And citizen science projects, like you also mentioned, I think, for example, Zooniverse, I'm not sure whether people are familiar with that, but that's a fantastic example where people work really together, they collaborate, and that shows that open science can really outpace universities. So open science puts power to the people who do the work, wherever they are. And then in that sense, universities just become helpful, yes, and not a necessity. All in all, we just argue that open science is faster, cheaper, more equitable, and actually better at validating knowledge than universities, making universities obsolete. Thank you.
Thank you, Vera. A cross-examination now for 3 minutes by Margaret.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to ask some clarifying questions. You shared with us the example of preprint publications, which very much got emerging COVID-19 information out to the world in a timely fashion. As an example, in your case that universities are obsolete, but would you not recognize that it was in fact university-based research and lab-based research that was contained in these preprints?
I agree to a certain extent, in the sense that basically the researchers that did the work were affiliated to a research, a university in a sense. Yeah. Or in a sense they were affiliated to a university. But the biggest difference is that they were not, I mean, the university, you describe it as being a community. But actually you have bigger communities within the open science that actually can move way faster than a university can, in a sense that the traditional way is, of course, to do the review if you go the university way, wait for months. And what the COVID showed us is that by being part of the open science community, by putting your findings out there as a preprint, you can move way faster and you can, well, collaborate in a sense with that community faster than the university does, making the university actually non-necessary.
Thank you. If I can ask you a few more questions of clarification, please. You made the argument that MOOCs are in fact more economic and cost-effective than pursuing a degree, paying tuition fees, which may indeed be the case, but do you not recognize that the content of MOOCs that are offered at university-grade education are in fact produced by university scholars and teachers?
No, I'm not necessarily, I don't agree with that, because your argument would be then the quality control is by the university, which is not necessarily the case. I think with open science you have the same quality, but in addition to that you have scale. So you have a lot of eyes looking together with you or creating this MOOC together collaboratively. Mm-hmm.
And if I could make a final point, you mentioned the Zooniverse as a very effective platform for scaling participation, bringing many people together to participate in scientific research. And yet it is almost 100% researcher-led research that is supported on the Zooniverse. I would posit this as a case example of the ongoing importance of universities. Would you disagree with that?
Yes, because they not necessarily are tied to those universities, in a sense that they would do it as when they were tied to another university, or even maybe when not tied to a university, they would be involved. So based on a community would do evenly well.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you both. The next speech will be given by Caroline Cunningham.
Hello, everyone. I would like to give a student perspective of the role of open science to not make the university obsolete. The affirmative team argues, of course, that open science makes the universities obsolete, but let's be clear, access to knowledge is not the same as education. Open science doesn't replace universities, it actually makes them more valuable. First of all, as a student, I of course realized how expensive education can be, as you mentioned already. The textbooks, journal subscriptions and everything can be very, very costly. Open science reduces reliance on costly resources and directly supports, for instance, the University of Groningen's ambition to offer more for less. Open science therefore lowers the financial barrier. However, free access to papers does not equal free education. Students still need structure and guidance. That's where the universities come in, I argue. Open science gives us access to research far beyond the syllabus. Instead of only reading what the lecturer, for instance, assigns, you can also explore diverse viewpoints, compare findings, and even see how scientists disagree with each other. That helps us to develop critical thinking skills. But without universities, how do the students know what is of good quality and where to start? Universities train us to separate strong evidence from the weak claims, reliable studies from misleading ones. So open science opens the library and lowers the costs, but university teaches us how to read it critically. Together, they strengthen our education. Furthermore, employees today, they want T-shaped professionals, people with a broad knowledge, but a very specific and deep expertise in one. They want knowledge across many areas, but expertise in one subject. Open science provides the breadth, the freedom to explore topics outside our study program, but the depth, the vertical side of the T, comes only from the university education, through structured training, supervision, and degrees. Together, this combination prepares us for the outside world and to be more adaptable and employable. Open science broadens, therefore, the horizons. Universities build depth. So to conclude, my argument mainly is that open science is not the end of universities, it's their opportunity. It helps students think critically, save costs, and prepares them for the real world and for the career. But only universities can guide them and mentor us responsibly. Open science gives us tools, but universities teach us how to use them. And I want to add that, of course, this is only a tip of the iceberg because I am a student. I don't know everything that open science can give us, but I think there's much more that I still don't know about open science and what it can give to universities and how they can complement each other. So that was my argument.
Thank you, Caroline. We have 3 minutes for some questions from Danila.
Hi, thank you. So my first question is about knowledge access and gatekeeping. Would you agree that today most academic papers and even full university courses are available online, often for free?
Is that a question? Well, sorry, can you repeat that? I don't understand the question.
Would you agree that today most academic papers and even full university courses are available online and often for free?
Yes. Well, not all of them, but
and then you may
some of
say
them.
that access isn't the same as understanding, right? But the key point is that access to knowledge itself is no longer depending on being enrolled at a university, right?
I do not completely agree with that because as a student I can say that reading a paper does not necessarily mean that you understand what it is saying. So you need the university professors or people that have knowledge about this subject help you to guide you through this paper.
So you need the people in the container and not the container and its structure, is what I'm hearing.
No, they're trained by this structure in the container.
Thank you. My second point, excuse me. My second point was about, you said, paraphrasing, that universities uniquely ensure quality through institutional, let's say, oversight. But you say it happens, through peer review and institutional oversight, correct?
Yes.
And yet we know that even the top elite journals institutions have had to retract thousands of papers for fraud and error, right?
Yeah.
So if these closed systems with limited reviewers miss all these problems, wouldn't having more eyes, open data, open code, etc., catch errors faster?
Yes? Yes.
So then, if transparency improves reliability, then open science doesn't lower quality, but it's the very mechanism that raises it.
Maybe Taichi can help me with this one?
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. But I think it goes back to a circular logic in relating to the argument that was also shared beforehand, also by Margaret, in the sense that you are still saying that it's an academic institution that is facilitating this peer-reviewed process and open sharing of data. So you say that it's a container, but this container also adapts and also incorporates open science practices to improve what is being done upon. So even though we can argue that universities have a more conservative leaning towards specific ideas, the people inside it are not all just conservatives. They are also, call it early career researchers, early career academics, as Caroline pointed out, students, I think are a majority of the people in universities, to be able to say that they're not thinking more critically, to be able to incorporate new ideas through open science in this container is also what's helping to push forward for the new directions. Sorry.
So, if I understood you correctly, you argued that universities can adapt to open science and that they're trying to persist in a changing climate.
So
right?
I'm going to have to stop you here. Thank you all. Thank you, Caroline, Taichi, and Daniela. We are moving to the closing statements of tonight's debate, and the first statement will be given by the team arguing that open science makes the university obsolete, by Mira.
Thank you very much. To summarize our key arguments, I'd like to think big. Let's just think big together. I would like to turn to the UNESCO recommendation on open science that was signed by all the countries in the world, one of the rare things that we all agree on, although it is non-binding, but it does have commitments to implement it by different levels, universities, so institutional level, national, international, and so on. It does provide us with a framework for a universally shared understanding of open science and its values. And I'd like to argue, to continue the arguments of my colleagues, that our arguments that the university, that open science makes the university obsolete, will fully reflect these values that we all seem to share or at least agree on. First of all, publicly funded knowledge is a public good. I think more or less we all agree on that, and open science facilitates direct access to knowledge, which universities have traditionally monopolized, serving as gatekeepers, putting barriers and paywalls in some cases, even though some of it is already shared in open access. So collective benefit is not something universities can ensure en masse. With open access to research preprints, open educational resources, shared data sets, this knowledge is now freely accessible to everyone and anywhere. And the real world proof, well, we don't only have to think of universities like this one in an affluent Western country. I'd like to bring the example closer to my home country, Ukraine. Ukrainian high school students and other learners that are now in very precarious crisis war times are able to learn freely from the math courses shared by MIT. And this was the initiative, the grassroots initiative of students from this very same MIT who wanted to share. There are also many other learners in crisis-affected communities who benefit from open knowledge beyond the university walls, beyond the West, beyond our academia. And that's argument number one. When we go further and look at another value that open science community agrees on is equity and fairness, but also diversity and inclusiveness. It's also something that open science, as a general movement, as a general umbrella, is more able to ensure in a more equitable, decentralized and inclusive knowledge production way, unlike universities. The traditional university systems, as we've already argued, often reinforce the privilege, favoring those who have the right passport, who speak the right language as their native language, or have the fitting background or maybe less caring responsibilities. In contrast, open science opens research also to marginalized groups and to new voices, who are usually objects of study and not their subjects, not the active co-creators of this knowledge, because university walls traditionally gatekeep them, even though there are some attempts, I have to admit, to include them as well. Traditionally, their ways of knowing, especially of traditional communities, of indigenous communities, is deemed less worthy than what our academic system, led by universities, considers as a worthy and quality knowledge production system. So indigenous communities in countries like Canada and Australia, for instance, now shape health and environmental research as recognized partners by adhering to open science principles and principles of care and principles of custodianship over their data, instead of being overlooked or exploited just as subjects of the study conducted by academics behind the ivory tower. And citizen science platforms that have been named perform a similar function. So big picture thinking, open science also reduces barriers and democratizes research beyond university walls, allowing marginalized and under-resourced communities to actually participate actively as co-creators of this knowledge and not only its recipients or subjects. And finally, there's the argument, the value of quality and integrity. This is also something that open science and systems beyond the university can give space and a legitimacy for in the shape of alternative credentials that my colleagues have also mentioned. This erodes one of the core functions of the university. So we've mentioned that open credentials are being accepted, that the open source coding communities are also accepting, non-traditional, non-academic contributions as a proof of quality, as a proof of your competence, and not necessarily a degree. So the university degrees lose their exclusive status. To put simply, open science shifts the power from institutions that are often in their core elitist and bureaucratic to decentralized communities, to communities as a whole, to global communities, giving access to people, first of all. What once required a university gatekeeper to protect knowledge and ensure its quality is now possible for everyone. And the quality is also ensured by these community standards that are also manned by people with good access to knowledge. So learning, research, and recognition are all open, all accessible, all possible. Open science doesn't just open doors. It does tear down the ivory tower and can turn it into a playground accessible for anyone curious enough to engage in it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mira. Now the closing statement from the team arguing against the proposition given by Taichi.
Yes, thank you for providing the floor and letting me give the concluding remarks. And thanks to everyone to positioning themselves both for or against open science. I think maybe to the crux of this, it's to say that open science isn't making universities obsolete. It's, of course, can be universities outdated, but then open science are the tools to be able to call it refresh, to democratize it, to help the sort of epistemic disequality that we see of differences in the global north or the global south. So open science is still the tool to do so. It actually strengthens the propositions of universities being able to support the actual, call it, pillars of knowledge dealing, of education breaking, and of course something that the opposition has pointed out, you're reinforcing the statement for open science makes universities obsolete. All of these examples that you provided still use universities as an example. So for me to hear that universities make, open science makes universities obsolete actually has not been really strongly defended, if I may say so, in the aspect that you still use universities as references rather than highlighting specific open science communities as key drivers. So rather than having a specific open science community, whether it's the one in the Netherlands or any other communities globally, to be able to say that they have been a pillar of driving something forward, it has been, in fact, universities that have been using open science to be able to call it democratized science, to indeed improve the quality of research and improve the quality of education. And something that was brought up when you mentioned regarding the open science definition of UNESCO, something that they actually highlight in the recommendations is the universities being a core pillar or a core tenet of delivering open science to democratizing. At least this is what has been highlighted. So anyway, but to bring that point to close... I'm
sorry, I thought that your role was not to question me or interrogate me.
No, it's just more of just the clarification of what is highlighted, sorry. But then, yeah, indeed, it's more of being able to say from our position, and everything that we've heard so far is just actually reinforcing where open science actually strengthens the university, and why embedding more practices of open science within the university actually leverages, call it, the impact the universities can have, not only just to the students, the academics, the researchers, or policy officers, but more broadly to society by being a strong component into driving change that we would like to see. Highlighting the COVID-19 vaccine programs, I was actually working in a pharma company at the time, being able to help facilitate the vaccine development. It wasn't just it wasn't just highlighting the open access publications, but it was also the rigor, or call it the academic rigor, that scientists in pharmaceutical companies were looking to evaluate to be able to assess. And of course, open science practices help disseminate the knowledge, but then when you're looking to curate which specific genetic variants you're interested in, what we're looking to highlight is actually academic institutions still have the higher rigor to be able to assess the use of the genetic data available. Hence, open science, or the democratization of science, makes academic institutes more robust. And of course, highlighting the educational experience of students, I think this is something not just for the University of Groningen, but more broadly across the Netherlands. We do see people interested in open science, considering it even goes to government policy point. However, how it's being disseminated to the majority of the population attending universities is something that can be highlighted and strengthened and further improved upon, and that's something that, as we look to improve university practices in the future, is something that we can look to strengthen with open science, not to make the universities obsolete. All right, I have time, great. In relation to that, I tend to ramble a bit anyway, but no, and maybe providing the perspective on what we want as a university, I think what I'd like to see is universities now are trying to push for having more impact, to be more, call it, transdisciplinary, having more engagement with local stakeholders, and not just being, saying, citizen science projects, but also being the bridge between these citizens and the local provinces to industrial partners, but also influencing government policy. And if you see that as a role of the universities, then having this sort of higher quality, having higher assessments is required as being the trusted partner between all these stakeholders. Otherwise, this bridge of trust is being lost. And if I can finish my last blurb with a quote, society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they'll never lie in. So if we think of universities, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we can look to future-proof what's going to happen in the next 50 to 100 years in academic institutions. Open science is really the key to be able to help facilitate this. So yeah, I do see it as a supporting partner rather than being something that makes universities obsolete.
Thank you, Teichi, and thank you, everybody. Let's thank the speakers also with a round of applause. So we can open the discussion to ideas from the audience or questions, and I think I'll get us started with a little reflection on what I observed. It seems that we have a bit of a ship of Theseus kind of argument happening, because we are struggling about what the university is. Will making changes aligned with open science actually change what we call the university? If so, the argument can be made that the university will become obsolete. If not, the university doesn't become obsolete. And in that sense, we were discussing a lot about what makes the university and what are the essential pillars of the university. And if those will be changed by open science practices, can we still call it a university? And I'm curious to also hear the thoughts of the debaters about where did you notice these points of friction as you were exchanging ideas throughout this debate, and what your thoughts are on the disagreements that you encountered.
If I may start, I think one of the main ones you pointed out very aptly is the understanding of what the university is, right? Our argument really concerns the university as it is right now, the traditional structure as we see it. Of course, it's in flux, it's always in flux. What it becomes, well, is something else, is a new entity. And I don't think we disagree on the notion in our roles, right, in our assigned roles. We couldn't choose them, by the way, we got assigned them randomly. In our roles, we do agree that open science changes it, transforms it, right? What it transforms it to is somewhere we, I think, diverge into interpreting what it is. We say from our side is that this is not the university as we know it. This is not the current academic institution that has monopoly on certain, prerogatives and monopoly on certain powers, so to say, assigning credentials, ensuring quality, giving structure for students, and so on and so forth, right? While I think the opposing team was arguing, indeed, this is something the university will become as a better, improved, new University 2.0, 4.0, 5.0, I've heard versions of that as well, which in our opinion, for the sake of our discussion, debate, is not the current university we're discussing. Thank you.
And I think you mentioned it as well. We were really focusing on the gatekeeping function. So what changes is actually the function of the university, and that makes it obsolete in a sense that open science can take over that. And one of the things also mentioned was the community perspective. So go back to the history, which is the why, which is the organization of scholars, your Latin term of scholars being the university. I think that is exactly what open science is. It is a new group of the Latin form of university. It is this community, but in a different form.
I think that's very well summarized. But what I would pull out of the discussion is that I think we gave the word obsolete a different weighting. In your we share much in our seeing the value in open science practices, generally speaking, and we talked about transformation and evolution of the role of the university. And I made the argument that brings it back to its first original principles of origin. But obsolete, I would understand to mean it doesn't need to be there at all anymore. And I think that maybe we had some difference of definition of the strength of the word obsolete.
We also acknowledged that for some professions, lawyers, pilots, you need a degree and you needed it. I mean, and also wet labs, I think was also one of your examples that you can't do pipetting in a community. I mean, it's nice to have a university wall building where that can take place. I think we don't disagree on that.
Yeah, I guess, but then going back to, we talk about the origin of what universities were, but then universities have existed for what, 2,000 years? So then they have changed also over that time. It's not that we are still falling into the same principles of how academic research or academic education has changed. So I think it's also just to say that keeping up with the zeitgeist or keeping up with the times is essential for universities to thrive. Hence, open science is being one of the tools that's being adapted now to ensure that the universities can stay being functional for another 1,000 or 2,000 years. And actually, for me, the counterpoint I was hoping you'd touch in right now is sort of the value creation of universities in relation to, okay, how much can we valorize our research, or how much can we actually, call it the return on investment, if we are giving these people time, because that's what you see sort of happening a lot in the US, where you have a lot of, sorry, that was a deep breath. But in emphasis relating to people having to spin out a company, or people having to have some sort of actual value proposition, and then even hearing from the local hospital that anything that they do research-wise has to be impactful, and impact being a very broad question mark, because at the end, not everyone's going to have a rare disease or these specific conditions that they're coming up with a new cancer drug for. However, you have a lot of people that are working to do, call it basic research, but that's being called underfunded, and then how to call it democratize some of that research is being done through open science. So indeed, it's sort of the funding instruments that are being pushing towards what academic institutions are doing are not translating to the actual impact that universities are emphasized or should be, or hence established for. So it's also sort of that, call it crossroads that we see right now, that what is the actual value of universities? Is it partly indeed adding impact to society, but then how is that being assessed is also different from, call it, government agencies that give money to the universities to grant agencies that see, oh, we need to have a return on investment, otherwise we don't see that we actually have contributed to impact. But that's another story. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for these reflections. If there are any questions from the audience, we have the possibility to engage in a dialogue now. So there will be a microphone that will be brought to you by Sylvia. So just raise your hand if you want to contribute to our conversation about open science and the university.
It's working? Should be working. Oh, it's from the top. Okay, thank you. So I was a bit alarmed by both sides, actually, and your understanding of universities, historically speaking, because you're speaking, and I think my worry would be that it's a straw man argument that both of you are building, in the sense that you sort of seem to think that universities, before open science, people did not have access to books, people did not have access to research materials, researchers were not working together with society, etc., which is of course patently not true. So maybe my worry is here that very recent developments, thanks to Elsevier, from like the past few decades have muddied your conceptions of universities, and that now you equate universities with closed access Elsevier systems, and that those definitely, I guess both sides can agree, are hopefully obsolete. Elsevier is obsolete, Springer is obsolete, but universities are alive and kicking. But universities have never been closed. University knowledge was traditionally not closed off. That's my worry. I think that both sides view might need a university lesson in the history of universities.
It's an excellent point. And in fact, I didn't want to go into a whole history lesson. Exactly as you described, they always were open and accessible, and it's a recent development. I shared your alarm, but on a slightly narrower part of the story that you just shared. There was some parts of the debate where it sounded like leave it to the market can do it more efficiently. And that is so tangibly not true. We have lost so much value. The Elsevier example is Exhibit A. Leave it to the market, then it's organized based on commercial principles that benefit the company and not other things we value in society. And we didn't get into the weeds on that, but I think I see nodding. I think we probably agree. But that was more alarming to me. Just let others do it because they can do it more efficiently, and that would be a hugely dangerous path to follow. That'll give us another Elsevier.
Absolutely, agree with you, and I hope that you didn't hear those connotations from our arguments, because any beyond the university structures we were referring to were mostly specific to communities, communities of scientists, communities of citizen scientists, communities of learners, communities beyond that, professional communities as well, not per se markets, hopefully not markets. And to address Lucas's question, of course, and concern, agreeing with you, of course, it's not black and white. We're not getting into extremes. Universities are not fully closed, never were, hopefully never will be. Open communities are not fully open or extremely open. It's always a journey. It's never, an absolute ideal that we've arrived to. So definitely true. And of course, the concerns we have as to the gatekeeping role of the university are tainted by the very concerns you addressed, by the publishers controlling the narrative, by the publishers controlling the recognition and rewards that our scientists get, the teachers get, by the gatekeeping role they also play, together with some universities who still pay attention to the rankings, together with the publish or perish culture. Of course, it is reinforced, and I really would hope that, that we do not go that way. At the university, 4.0 or 5.0 never becomes obsolete in that way.
I think maybe just one quick counterpoint to the whole science being, or university access being equitable. I mean, at the end of the day, you have a mural for Aletta Jacobs because, she was told not to be able to get into university. And that's, what, 100 plus years ago? 150? So then it's sort of like, if you look at, as you said, the entire history of university, there has still been some gatekeeping. We might say that indeed the knowledge has been available, the people to be able to do knowledge, the people to be able to study, to be able to disseminate has also been gate-kept, whether they've had the privilege or indeed just being male compared to female. So then it is changing. It's something that is, call it right now, we live in a very nice opportunity that everyone has access. But then if you look at increasing tuition fees, call it the US or the UK, you also have people who are not able to go into university because of the fact that it is also still, access to education is still a right. So indeed, this is why, not to say that science has not been accessible beforehand, it's just more, there is also people who are able to get into university to be able to access it is different. So I think if the Netherlands statistics is correct, 25% of people have a bachelor's. So then that means that 75% of people don't have a bachelor's, who didn't have the opportunity to go to university, who didn't have the opportunity to be able to indeed have these discussions that we are having now. So that's still quite a large, sizable percentage of the population. So I agree wholly, but access to people getting this education or having the right to it is improving.
I'm afraid that the example was the Dutch access to education, and only 25% having the bachelor degree is not entirely accurate in that regard, because it's not always, or in many cases, not because of the gatekeeping or because of the education here is not affordable. We can agree that it's rather affordable if you're an EU citizen, again, so which puts extra barriers to it. I mean, you would probably also know, as I do, what that means to not have Dutch nationality or a Dutch passport at that point. So this goes deeper into how the educational system is constructed, of course, and the value of education, but also the value of degrees, and the value of degrees in you having building a livelihood, having a livelihood. So that takes us into a whole new kind of discussion, the value of education per se, and the value of credentials that are assigned by formal institutions such as universities. Yeah.
Any reactions to this, or perhaps questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm just wondering about kind of focus on the point you mentioned about that the open science is kind of can replace about the gatekeeper role as a university, but I'm wondering about even though you can share this knowledge as the open science, but how about the situation that, for example, like physical lab, that there are a lot of training and a lot of knowledge that cannot really be putting online or putting on the more virtual space to do it. You really need students to really come into it to do chemistry lab, biology lab, etc. So in a way that it seems like this type of gatekeeper role is still need to remain with this type of framework and structures, because you have these abilities to build up this type of resources for students to learn. So how do you feel about this part?
I feel like it's probably directed to our side, as we were arguing for open science replacing many of the crucial structures. It doesn't replace all of the structures. Open science is also, it's not an entity, right? It's a community, it's a movement, it's a way of doing science, it's an approach, it's a method, so to say. To some extent, some of this has been addressed by the current open science-related developments, such as, for instance, open hardware, which is, sorry, I'm going to do like this, which is basically sharing the designs of equipment freely in open access, so that other communities beyond the university walls or in other universities could replicate it and could build it using their own capabilities, local resources. But that's again reinforcing the gatekeeping function, right? You still need resources centrally organized by whatever entity that is. Could be a university, could be a governmental structure or any other entity that actually has the knowledge, the know-how, but also the resources to build it. So to some extent, open science facilitates making it more open by at least sharing the sources, the source files, the source codes, whenever that's needed. But some things, right now, there's no capacity for replicating for what the university has, unless you go market-wise, unless you go to commercial entities, and unless you look at private-public partnerships, for instance, as a potential replacement for the classroom labs.
Thank you very much. I have another question about, again, on the gatekeeper part. So in terms of open science, like, for example, in my research, we have something called archive. Basically, everyone can post things on that. It's not like journal, which you might have a reviewer, etc., to do peer review process. So I think that my question is about open science. How about the quality of it? Because university also serve. Not entirely, it's always true, but university always serve in a way that they are gatekeeper about, like Margaret, right? Yeah. Just you mentioned about the quality of what kind of knowledge is delivering out. Then if today is the open science case, how are we be able to, I guess is the way I'm kind of wondering how we will be able to improve that open science is able to get keep the quality of it, and how general public is able to have the knowledge to know what is the things they should know, and is that really the right things to learn, or is this actually nonsense things to learn? Thank you.
I can give that a crack if you'd like. So it's an interesting question that you're asking about how do you ensure the quality of what's produced and shared widely. And these are some of the really interesting innovations in the open science movement, because it's not only preprints but also open peer review. And then publish, review, curate models where even after it's shared openly and then there's been an open review that you can show a progression of improvements to the paper, whatever it is that's been shared, and then selected sort of for a final, and now it's reached final stages and it's good. And it can be a community that curates this. And it's still drawing on the trappings and knowledge of the scientific system, but it's doing it very, very openly. It's sort of a radical openness of the historically completely academic system. And that's where a lot of the quality controls are coming in across the board. And I would say that it moves the gatekeeping out of the hands actually of the journals and commercial journals, saying this is what's selected and this is what passes stickler reviewer 2 that came up with some ridiculous rewrite request, which might not have been necessary if you'd had a bigger body of open peer review from your field of practice. You might have had much more valuable feedback for improving what it is you've shared based on that. So it moves the gatekeeper role into the community of practice, or a community of researchers that have knowledge in that field outside of these other ways of making a decision, like a journal editorial process. So a lot of that's there. I think the word gatekeeper is probably one of the interesting ones for us to unpick. What do we mean when we say it's a gatekeeper? Usually it means who's let in or who's let out, what's allowed to be seen, what's not allowed to be seen. And that's one of the things that open science is breaking open, but still within the academic system, still within research, universities, academic career ways, still within that, but the barriers are all broken down.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just wanted to add the scale of it. So in the open science movement, you have not only a couple of eyes looking with you for quality and rigor, but it's actually the whole world. It's a way larger scale in the sense that you can say that it's actually a higher quality if all people are watching, or if everybody can contribute and has access to your findings or your materials or whatever.
I just have something else to add. The fact that you see young, early career researchers at the beginning of a PhD trajectory being actively encouraged to also be reviewers. As part of your learning curve of what makes a good paper, what makes good paper writing. And that's something that you before would have had this hard hierarchy line of you're only allowed to do that once you reach here. Whereas the iterative learning curve is massively valuable if you get people at the very beginning of a PhD also doing review.
I'd like to quickly add, if I can.
Yes.
Yeah, because I heard you mention in the audience about tacit knowledge, basically, the skills and insights that you learn by doing things in a physical space. And that used to depend on being physically near your expert, but that's no longer the case. Tutorials, live stream lab sessions, shared protocols and projects, or global Stack or Discord communities can facilitate that same propagation of know-how to anyone with internet access. And so 50 years ago, you may have had to stand next to a master to learn their craft. Today, you can stand next to them on a screen, and often with a better camera angle.
Thank you for this point, Daniela, and please jump in whenever you have anything else to say. I realize that it's a bit difficult to navigate the hybrid space, so we'll do better.
You're doing well.
Any more questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you. Actually, I was a little bit misguided by the announcement of this event, because I was thinking there would also be some critical reflection on the open science movement itself. And you lured us into two parties who are both fiercely in favor of open science. And the misleading part is that universities could be obsolete, which is, of course, so unreal, because we need, in these geopolitical times, we need gatekeepers of independence, autonomy, of critical reflection. And God forbid that 100% of the population is all just as academic and just as learned, because it will be one big debate without... You need authority, you need selection, you need elitism, and that's organized by the universities. My worry would be that open science has some pretty political, a view of society which seems to me comparable to communism, which is extremely sympathetic, but not working in practice. So imagine there were no universities. Who would employ the practitioners of open science? The research labs, the NIH that is guided by Trump rules. So you need autonomous parties with authority, and most inhabitants of a country would say, I'm glad I'm not as learned as some of those, and I trust them that they will do a good job on behalf of the common interest. And I think open science is a little bit naive in the underlying assumption that everybody should be allowed to practice academic research. Nobody, that's not real and not, I think, not good either.
Thank you for this point. It's also choosing what to focus on in a 6-minute piece was a bit of a challenge, because there was a lot of beautiful questions in the introduction to the topic. We did indeed focus on the obsolete part, but we had an opening sentence of open science is seen as the Holy Grail. And we didn't bring this into the debate, but I share your view that there's a danger of it being overhyped, that we just do some kind of blind, throw it all open. In a similar way, we're dangers of AI hype right now, that just everything, fascinated by the new, do all the new things without critical attention to, are we still doing it well? Do we still have systems of checks and balances? Not moving too fast. I think a critical eye is valued, and that's one of the beauties of the university. Coming back to our premise, it's about critical thinking and criticism as a constructive tool for improving quality and rigor, and that can be applied to open science as well. So we didn't bring it into this debate, but maybe it's worth other conversations.
I'd like to quickly add that comparing open science to communism kind of confuses entirely two different things. Communism redistributes property by force, whereas open science redistributes visibility by design. It doesn't erase authorship or merit. In fact, it protects them by ensuring every contribution is transparent, traceable, and there's accountability. We still recognize who did the work. We just let everyone see how it was done. And this is not to say that we're saying everything should be free by degree and everyone should participate regardless of their competencies or actual skills, if I understood you correctly.
No, indeed, this was not the focus of this debate, because I think it deserves a whole separate debate to actually think and critically rethink open science and its premises and the values we were also referring to. And indeed, maybe it is going too far comparing it to communism, but I do understand what you refer to. But then you would also say that sustainable development goals are also very reflective of communist ideas, right? Like the common goods, the kind of access for all, education for all, and so on. So many premises that try to bring the equity into the society. I think it would be taking it too far, but I also think that open science inherently has problems in itself. Although unlike the elitist structures, it tries to equalize participation in many ways. Not to say that everybody should be an expert, and then what is our understanding of expertise and of an expert? Who is an expert, and how does our society put them on a pedestal or not? And where does the community, the actual society fit in, and every citizen? So I think this is a whole layered discussion, and it's really nice and good to bring up these questions. And maybe one of the next debates could be touching on this critical assessment of our understanding and interpretation of open practices and open science as something we as society actually chose to follow, whether due to the national policy and funder requirements, or due to open science values resonating with core academic values that our academic community promises to uphold.
Maybe just one thing relating to the grant funding agencies. Their policy is very much open as possible, closed as necessary. So it is meaning that just because you follow open science, you have to follow all the practices to become 100% transparent. And in relation to that, something we didn't dive into, we talk now open science as this monolithic thing of, hey, there's only one way of doing this. But then depending on the discipline, they already have different levels of how they are interpreting it. And then actually some disciplines say, why do we have to do open science? We already do it anyway. It's just good science practice. So at the end of the day, maybe just as you said right now, everyone's sort of following the zeitgeist of having to do open science, but in reality, it's just following good scientific practice that doesn't require this new name. It has been done already previously, sharing of data, making sure that people across borders can actually use what you're using. But now it's indeed becoming more of a policy point since the reproducibility crisis that happened, and it's becoming more important to have open access as a Dutch policy point. So that's, I think, maybe where some of the confusion can arise in why is everything becoming open science, when in reality it's much more nuanced in what is actually good open science practices within different disciplines.
Just to add, in our scientific code, it is noted that we have to be as transparent as you can be. So it's actually us as scientists who vow to being as transparent as you can be. That's these, yeah, so it's...
Thank you for these reflections. I think I saw another question in the audience.
Yeah, this is maybe a different spin on the previous question a little bit, and it comes a bit down to what overall we value as a society. And of course there is academia that we value, but at the same time, there's also other crucially important professions to the function of society that do not require academic degrees and, for example, in the trades, also that do provide, for example, good payment and, in a sense, some of the developments, for example, in Germany that I've seen and we've seen is that, yeah, people overwhelmingly have been going more and more into university, and there's a lack now of people who are in the trades and can do certain tasks not required by this. And I feel like this is a bit missing from this debate, especially earlier someone mentioned that 75% of people were unable to get a bachelor's degree in...
Don't have one, sorry, don't have one, not unable, don't have one, that's all. Yeah.
Okay, then that's a bit of a different, yeah, sure. But yes, I still think it's important to also keep that in mind and not only place solemn or only value on academic degrees and titles or this kind of academic skills.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to say that you need to have a degree to function in society. I think, especially from our perspective on defending why open science is necessary, I think the University of Groningen is actually in a really nice position because you have the University of the North initiative. For those that are not aware, these are the linking between the RUG, UMCG, and the hogescholen, so the Hanse, the NHL Stenden, and also the MBO. So indeed, being able to build these bridges, and what we're working to do now is hopefully by disseminating open science practices in the sense of, hey, these are things that we're currently using, can we disseminate it better, is something that we're looking to work on. So indeed, not everyone needs to have a bachelor's, master's, PhDs. And I feel sometimes there's a bit of a stigma that if you are engaged in research projects, then you need to have these. But in reality, if you look at how, okay, my bias in healthcare comes along a lot, but then patient groups, they don't have bachelor degrees, anything, but they're becoming very much for the focal point of whether a drug becomes effective or not, because it's more of if they're going to have poor side effects, you know that from a biological perspective, but also will patients be willing to be able to take medication is also something that is discussed with them, because patient advocacy groups have quite a lot of power, if you want to call it that way, in deciding what is considered good line of practice for first-line treatments, second-line treatments, because it's also patients are going to respond whether they actually will follow the doctor's recommendations. So yeah, I don't really see that you need to have this gold standard to say that this is the only way of doing things. I feel like sometimes actually talking to some professors who have their children that don't go into academia feel that as a chip on their shoulder, but in reality it should be, hey, it's fine. Everyone has their own pathways to follow. Open science, if you want to sort of collaborate with them, is just one tool to be able to work this, we call it, throwing down the ivory towers, building bridges across different institutions and stakeholders is all we're trying to promote for now.
I'd like to chime in on that one as well. I really like your point. It is encapsulated in the open science recommendations, acknowledgement of other forms of having knowledge, other skills, other insights, other contextual. So in the principles and vision for open science, it's encapsulated. It's harder to bring in the university context. I'm seeing it a lot in my own field, because my field's citizen science. So collaborations with other societal stakeholders, other roles in society, and not necessarily purely on research, but other forms of knowledge production that have, for example, policy impacts. Healthcare is a really rich example. It's less clear how to bring that into the university outside of the context of a really specific type of research question for which a wide variety of stakeholders you would want to get involved, or just collaboration, societal collaboration, social innovation. So I think it sits there more clearly than it sits in the university itself. And the other place I would say it, and maybe those with an education orientation can comment on it, is community engaged learning as one of the movements in teaching, where the topic that you're learning about, you step out of the classroom and engage with other people that are active on that topic in a community context or societal context. And then you can have skills and trades and other professions or other societal roles that are really relevant. So you're seeing it there too, I think.
Maybe just to add one point, sorry. I feel like also some of that pressure to deliver something is also not just, call it the academic pressure, but also grant funding pressure. So then as an academic, you're sort of saying you have 4 years to publish something. So conducting, call it these transdisciplinary research where you can actually engage everyone from indeed like individuals, from citizens to larger parties, require quite a lot of time. On average, it's about 8 to 10 years. And even then, the actual impact that you see will take much longer. But then if you say that to the European funding agency, they're like, no, we need it in 4 years, and then we expect you to deliver something in the second year to say, what's your next steps afterwards? So I feel it's also this unsustainable pressure of having to deliver something, which is actually not reflecting to the real nature of, call it, good research being done, because that's sort of people needing to say, I need to hit my, I say KPIs, but like just saying the tick box exercise, saying like, okay, this is what they want from me, I will take the box exercise, rather than really being proactive of saying, how can I have more lasting impact with what we are being funded for?
It seems there is some conflict between the neoliberal dynamics within academia and then the principles of open science. I don't know if you want to reflect on this, or this is something that I'm misunderstanding.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question. Can you clarify that for me? Because in the sense, like, neoliberalism is in the sense that you want more people to be commercially driven with the research, in the sense of, like, as Margaret mentioned, the market-driven aspects, whereas open science is more like the transparency of people getting more involved. Is that what you want? So then there's a mismatch of, call it, sorry, using this tick box exercise, they're going to deliver a new drug in 5 years rather than 3 years because they're able to, you know, talk with the patients more often. That's a really bad example. It takes much longer, but...
This is indeed a really confusing term, and it can point in many different directions. In it, the market aspect of, for example, publishing companies, but also the pressure to produce at a specific rhythm without necessarily it allowing the space to engage with research in a way that would allow, like, the practicing of these principles. Making data available, making sure it's reproducible. So sticking to all of these principles that are central to open science requires a lot of time, requires an effort that is, it's considerable, and it's not necessarily embedded in the structures that we function within in a lot of academic institutions.
One aspect of what you might be getting at is what we've built into our systems, where we have a particular kind of pressure built into the system. And also for the funding bodies, it's their mandate to spend public funds well. So they also have a pressure to show return on investment in how funding is allocated in research programs. So they are also vulnerable to arguments for it has to yield economic growth, it has to yield new innovations, it has to have societal impact. So some of these kinds of terms floating around, you'll also see brought into the funding bodies because they feel a similar pressure, and it comes from the same place for them. It's a political pressure. It's political decisions about where should money be spent at a nationwide level to yield economic benefit, political benefit, military benefit. And that gets brought into these funding structures, and they're sort of systemic structures. So it's what gets passed down to us as hit your milestones and your deliverables comes from a prove that the money was well spent kind of a place.
And if I may add to that, even well, open science uses neoliberal vocabulary as well and operates the terms dictated by this logic or by this system, talking about returns on investment, right? Talking about measuring impact in specific terms, talking about very like market-driven indicators that we have to show in order to be deemed as worthy or deserving of a specific career step, a specific funding. So I think, yeah, you can't really delineate one from the other because, you know, it still happens within this society that has a lot of neoliberal connotations in how we make decisions, how indeed what you said, national funding gets allocated, what priorities we as society choose to focus on. So it's still, I think it's quite intertwined, and even though the logic of open science inherently in its pure classical form that we probably will never reach but are maybe striving towards, even though it's more less neoliberal, so to say, it still operates, well, in the current day and age with the current reality. So it also adopts that logic to and vocabulary to talk to decision makers, to talk to people, to talk to each other even, and to the knowledge production system in general that is very much also driven by similar principles.
And we learn to adopt these words to get the funding. So we all sneak in valorization, impact assessment in our funding proposals.
Thank you for this insights.
I'd like to very briefly add that
yes,
maybe the real mismatch isn't between neoliberalism and open science/reality, but rather between the scientific ideals and the market logic that drives them, distorting these ideals. So open science isn't naive, you know, it's the correction to this, I guess, the side effect of neoliberalism. You could put it that way.
Yeah, sorry. I got a bit stuck when you asked the first question because indeed, I guess I have a very bias towards healthcare. But then one of the examples I like to bring, or that was brought up when discussing funding transdisciplinary research, is I think a lot of is focusing on having impact in, call it, societies or communities where actually the elderly population is the majority, and how do you get more people involved? And it's also talking to, call it, the stakeholders there or the people living there, saying what are actually the issues that you see facing. So then for them, the more local long-term goal isn't to increase revenue of their crops or get more young people to move. It's actually just improving the quality of life of the people there. And at least from what I understand from Southwest France, part of these initiatives are just having one person who drives a car offering coffee once a week to the different villages, because then for them, they actually have that sort of sense of community that they can actually have something to move forward for. Of course, that's not something you can have as a increasing revenue. It's how do you measure quality of life? Yes, there are metrics for quality of life, but not there, not now. It's very much thinking of like how actually can you assess impact, and how can you have that in, not in a neoliberal way, but very much in a transparent way, that if you have other areas that have these issues, for example, Japan, how can you actually translate some of these findings in one setting to another setting, and being able to be transparent with that is one way for these also municipalities to be able to be aware that these initiatives may work, maybe have some adjustments to cultural understandings, but it is a way of being able to disseminate good practices to be able to hit the, call it, the reasons of why they're facing pressures right now in society. So again, it's not always about this shiny new science or trying to harmonize it, but it can be just very much of, hey, we feel lonely in our villages because every year there's less and less people. Can we just be happier? And then there are research lines that do help support this, and it can be very much a simple initiative of let's drive a coffee car to them once a week.
Absolutely, thank you. I saw a question in the room.
Oh, is there still time? So both sides today, I think, talked a lot about making knowledge accessible, and it's also one of the values of open science. But I was thinking about, even if knowledge is accessible. So for example, even if papers are open, still not everyone is able to get access to them. Not everyone has the infrastructure to get access to them. So how could we make sure that open science doesn't just become a way for us to pretend we are doing or think we are doing better, but still maintain the same ways that knowledge is spread and the same power structures in research?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. I'd like to boil things down to the why. Why are we talking about open access? Knowledge is a common good. And access to knowledge is equal access to knowledge that exists is a human right. But if you have it in an open paper, do you know that there's an article about it in the Lancet that's on the topic that's of something affecting you? And do you know it's there? Can you find it? And then can you read it? So how do you make that knowledge open? And this is a whole other branch of open science we've touched on less, but talking about science communication, other forms of scholarly communication, other channels, not just broadcast, we learned a thing, but engaging with communities on the ground and getting information into the hands of people who have a stake in that topic. And that's a whole other side of what's being explored in open science. And it requires other formats for sharing information and knowledge in lay terms.
Yes, but to add, we're not going to solve all world problems in a sense that we cannot change those who have an internet connection or who don't. I mean, you're still confined in the group who has this connection. So, but I'm not sure whether we can. A whole
other world of inequalities come into play in this,
yes.
Of course. But part of it can be just on the side of encouraging researchers to share their outcomes and their findings in unusual ways, in unusual places, and have that also count as something that's accredited to you for sharing your knowledge. So in the systems of rewards and recognition, we can do a lot.
I'd like to add to this just very quickly. Of course, you're very fair to assume that not everybody has equal access even to means of accessing information. Yet most of the world really does. Even in the crisis-affected communities, people do. There are lots of technologies that actually make it now more accessible than ever, also in terms of the cost of technology, what it costs per citizen or per unit of information transmitted. So I think it's looking better than we are used to assuming, right? We don't think of, for instance, the whole continent of Africa as being blacked out. Many people do have a lot of access through mobile phones, through small satellites that are providing local internet. So in that way, I'm not saying it's equal, I'm not saying it's as good as here in the privileged West, but it's better than we are used to assuming. And again, I drew on the example from my home country, Ukraine. It's at war, yet people still have access to technology even on the front line due to Starlink technology or like other alternatives. Maybe it's not the best example, but it is what it is, and it does help, right? People have points, they're called like resilience points, I think, in the Ukrainian context, where you can go and access information, access internet if, for instance, your provider currently is unable to launch it right now for you to have it on. So it's better than it seems, yet it's not ideal. We're not there yet, and open science as a movement, as a way of opening up knowledge and knowledge production systems can do so much, but the rest needs to be done by other types of communication provision, governments, commercial and non-commercial entities working in this field.
If I can add a caveat, going back to Carline's point that you were making the case about why an education is important for a student and learning critical thinking and being guided through a document, the noise to signal ratio of the information out there is crazy. And for the average person judging is this good information or not is extremely difficult. So it brings it back to the role that universities play in communicating clearly. There was a massive move off of Twitter by academic Twitter. Bit of a question mark, did we do damage by leaving? Because that voice of knowledge sharing largely left too. Leave it as a question.
And I think this is a good moment to wrap up the discussion with a question and with the possibility to continue exploring this topic. I'd like to remind all of us that the National Festival for Open Science starts on the 24th of October in Groningen, and I hope this conversation will continue there and in all of our circles. And thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you to all the debaters who spoke. Thank you to everybody who brought a comment or a question, and have a good night.
Thank you for hosting us.